The one thing that is kryptonite to the Liberals is truth.
Hundreds of conflicts of interests, moving committees in camera, avoiding accountability, transparency. All of these are words that apply to the Parliamentary Oversight Committee called the Ethics Committee. And today, we're going to be getting a little bit of an inside look as to what goes on in that committee and why it is so important. And we're joined today by Mr. John Broussard. John, welcome to Learn Perspective.
It's great to be here, Ryan. It's been a long time, and I'm glad to be part of this. You guys are doing a great job at informing the public, so I'm really, really glad to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. And we can't inform the public without the good work that actually goes on in the oversight committees. So maybe let's just start with the fact that Canadians are aware that there are committees, but they may not be aware that there's three very special committees called the oversight committees. And what, in a nutshell, what is their purpose in our democracy?
Well, they are led by opposition chairs. So in my case, I chair the Ethics Committee. Kelly McCauley is the chair of Government Operations, and John Williamson is the chair of Public Accounts. And the purpose of these committees is to provide oversight on, in our case, ethics, access to information, privacy, lobbying. Kelly, the Government Operations Committee, they're in charge of government operations, expenditures. Obviously the ArriveCAN situation fell under the Government Operations Committee, and Public Accounts really works closely with the Auditor General, government contracts, government procurement. So these three committees serve an incredible purpose, and that is to provide accountability, transparency, and oversight, as you say. And it's been this way for many years, and there's a reason why they're led by the opposition. Not anymore, though.
And the reason why the Conservatives were able to do all that good work in the last Parliament is, for the main reason is, it was a minority Parliament. The opposition had majority in committees, so the opposition was able to really dictate with the agenda and hold the government to account. Now, the expectation is that would continue under the Carney Parliament because, as we all know, he was elected under a minority Parliament back last year in 2025. But through all these floor crossers, there's been a manufactured majority, and they changed the standing rules to recalibrate committees. So what did that do?
Well, I mean, let's go back to the election in April of 2025. You're quite right that Canadians elected a minority government. They elected an untested and unproven prime minister. So they were willing to give him the benefit of the doubt in terms of giving him a minority. And so the oversight committees had the majority. Every committee had a majority. And in fact, the Bloc and the Conservatives controlled the agenda of all these committees. And so what happened when this transactional majority started to happen, and the Carney Liberals started luring some of the opposition members from the Conservative Party and the NDP. It actually changed the dynamic on the committee. Well, they ended up getting a majority in the House, but what they decided to do was introduce a motion so that they can have a majority and seize control of the agenda at committees. And what's interesting is, even with the current majority that they have, which is just over 50%, the way they constituted the committees after their motion passed was to give themselves 58% representation on those committees. So typically, the committees will reflect what the House numbers reflect in proportion, and that's not the case. So they've effectively put themselves on steroids in these committees, but they added extra members and disproportionately affected the committees, which gives the majority. So what it does is it allows them to seize complete control of the committee's agenda, right? So, if we have, for example, some of the scandals that are currently ongoing at the Health Committee, Prescribe IT, the $300 million boondoggle, they're just controlling the agenda. I mean, we're filibustering, trying to get them to change their mind. But they don't have to do that anymore. We can do some fluff studies on something that they want. The other part of this too, Ryan, is that when we get to committee reports, we can or they can control the entirety of what's in that report. They can whitewash those reports if they want. And the importance of that is what we saw the Ethics Committee do recently with the conflict of interest report after we went through that study.
Right.
I mean, we've never had a more conflicted prime minister than we do right now. And the committee made what I thought were pretty significant recommendations to allow for an avoidance of conflict of interest on the part of the prime minister. And, they had, in that case, they would have had no say in terms of how that report had been drafted and had been tabled in the House. Now they will have complete say. And so, if they're not happy with something that you say as a witness, and I know you've been at committee before, they can basically say, well, you know what, his testimony didn't matter. We'll just whitewash it and draft and craft the report in whatever narrative they want. So it has a meaningful effect, this transactional majority that they have. And again, April 2025, Canadians didn't give them this for a reason. And now they've transacted this majority.
Now, when we're watching from home and Canadians are watching, we're seeing the different interactions between the MPs on committee, and we often see, there's some fireworks now and then of points of order and accusations flying back and forth about things that are said. You, as the chair, have to exercise objective judgment in dealing with those things. Is that difficult sometimes, separating your partisanship from your role as the chair?
I don't find it difficult. There are rules of procedure that have to be followed. I think the difficulty lies in the members sometimes, right? You're right, they get into heated exchanges. Some of the line of questioning with the witnesses get heated as well. And it's because, from an opposition standpoint, we're doing our job, our constitutional obligation, that's to hold the government to account. The points of order that you reference to oftentimes are not related to any procedural thing. It's oftentimes related to the fact that, I don't like the line of questioning, which doesn't make it a point of order or a procedure and rule thing. Or they use it to try to protect the witness that's there. Oftentimes it's a minister, right? And it's meant to disrupt the flow of a member that's asking the question, very legitimate questions, trying to get to the bottom of, some scandal or, something that we're investigating. And so the objectivity part is all part of the job. And I really try to be as objective as I can. Obviously, I'm a conservative. There are things that I'm not happy about, some things that I hear, some practice that's going on at committee, but I still have to maintain that objectivity, and I try to do that to the best of my ability based on the standing orders and the rules of procedures of committee as well. So,
and bringing this back to what this new majority in committee ends up impacting, we've seen a shift in chair personnel since these committees have been reconstituted, and the rules feel like they've changed for some of these chairs, especially the Liberal chairs on some of these committees. So what does that say to you when you're trying to be objective and you're trying to, adhere to the standing rules, yet you see these other chairs that are in some cases showing a blatant disregard to these standing orders?
Yeah, I'm actually also the committee coordinator as well. So I monitor all of the standing committees. I attend many of them in my role. And oftentimes I do see chairs, especially Liberal-led chairs, taking liberties with the rules of procedure. I actually spoke to House administration about this because I also think too that there's a responsibility on the part of the clerk. I have a great clerk at my committee who understands the rules of procedure. But there's also, like I see things like, our members raising their hands to try to make a point. The chair's not recognizing them. I also see maybe trying to move a motion and they gavel out. Like there's a lot of power that comes with being a chair. You control, the witnesses that appear. Obviously there's input from all the parties, but you control the meetings, you control when the meetings happen, you control how the meetings are to happen. And when I see them taking liberties and, undermining some of the rules of procedure, when I'm trying to do my job effectively as chair of ethics, it bothers me actually. And we've seen it increase since this transactional majority has taken place, where Liberal chairs have taken more liberties at committee and not necessarily following the rules of procedure that they should be. And it concerns me enough that I actually brought it out with House Administration. The clerk of the clerks, her and I had a meeting about it, and I asked her, I said, keep an eye on it, because, you know, the clerks are there to provide guidance to the chair, and when the chair doesn't accept that guidance, then it becomes a political problem, and I think we're heading in that direction.
And that's unfortunate, because the members of the committees, they're not supposed to be beholden to the government, right? They're supposed to all hold the government to account.
Okay.
That's the spirit of which it was they were constituted, but that is not what
they
is
were
happening.
meant to be independent,
right?
right?
And that is not what is happening.
No, and you know, we saw it shortly after the motion passed in the House of Commons, where they effectively seized control of committees as a result of this manufactured and transactional majority that they have. Literally 5 minutes at the Ethics Committee, even before I went downstairs, because we were filibustering, we weren't filibustering, they were filibustering a motion on Alto, and to have the finance minister, it was a 17-hour filibuster. So, you know, they expended a lot of energy to not have the finance minister come. Eventually they agreed to have him come, and he's coming this week. But, you know, by the time I went downstairs, the website had changed with the new members, and literally within 5 minutes of that vote, they moved to go in camera, which, you know, most people would think, well, in camera is on camera. It's actually in secret. And we've seen a pattern of this happen consistently throughout the committees. When they're not comfortable with the direction or the discussion that's happening, they'll either move to go in camera using their newfound transactional authority, majority, or they'll adjourn debate or adjourn the committee meeting. This is a pattern that we've seen consistently since this happened.
And there are legitimate reasons to go in camera, and we've talked to our audience a little bit about them.
Sure.
But it's supposed to be rare. And to your point, this has continued. And I believe just on a random, you know, we were looking for one of the committee meetings to cover and to screen, and we ended up seeing 4 different committees in camera at the exact same time. That's not supposed to happen, is it?
Well, there are legitimate reasons to go in camera when you're drafting a report, when you're discussing certain witnesses. You know, there are reasons to go in camera. The reason not to go in camera is when you're trying to avoid accountability, transparency, and oversight. That's not the reason to do it. And this pattern that I spoke about earlier, this consistent pattern of them using that, particularly in that first week of going in camera, Ryan, was for one purpose and one purpose only, and that was to avoid accountability. Because again, you know, having the majority at committee, as we did coming out of the last election, the opposition between the Bloc and the Conservatives, we were controlling the agenda, and we were making progress in finding out what happened, for example, with Prescribe IT, which is a $300 million boondoggle. We were making progress on the spaceport, right? The $200 million that was given to well-connected liberal insiders, basically a worthless company that one of the directors flipped into a $1.8 million windfall. They had shares that were basically valueless, and then all of a sudden he sold his shares after the government gave $20 million to. So we were making progress on a lot of these things. You know, Alto was another one. The fact that the finance minister had set up his own ethics screen, so-called, to protect himself from decisions that he was making, yet he was participating in decisions after. So we were making progress in all of that stuff. And then like that, everything was just shut down, moved in camera. That's how they used their transactional majority and their newfound power on committees to shut everything down. So, you know, that's not a reason to go in camera when you're trying to avoid accountability, oversight, and transparency. Begs the question, what are you trying to hide, right? And with this government, as we've seen, you know, and it's continuing under Carney, as we saw under Trudeau, there's a lot of well-connected insiders, lobbyists, family members who are benefiting as a result of this government. You know, I called them in the House the incestuous liberal cabal. It's precisely what's going on here. Well, they're doing very well. The people they're governing over, including the people that I represent in Barrie South Innisfil, are hurting and they're suffering as a result of 11 years of liberal government policy that takes care of their well-connected friends, but at great cost to the people they govern over.
Right. And this all kind of, I think, is conveniently packaged together in that conflict of interest report that the Ethics Committee was able to produce, at least under the direction of the opposition. And we saw hundreds of conflicts of interest under Mark Carney. We heard from Michael Sabia and Mark Blanchard that they didn't even seem to agree on the frequency of which they were speaking with the Ethics Commissioner's office. If you listen to them, it's every day. If you listen to the Ethics Commissioner, he hardly ever hears from them. We heard about concerns about what's in this fund that Mr. Carney put together. Who else is invested in this fund? Which unfortunately, Parliament can't get that information from Brookfield. So, what does this say to Canadians about this Prime Minister? Because there's a lot of questions of why did he leave his role at Brookfield and take this pay cut? It doesn't seem to feel like he did it out of altruism or philanthropy.
Yeah, I mean, that would be my opinion too. And to understand this goes back to 2020, if you recall, when the Prime Minister Trudeau at the time made Mark Carney his economic advisor in the Prime Minister's office. And I've said this publicly, and I stood in the House of Commons in December 2nd, 2025, and stated this, that the Carney being in there, free of any conflict of interest act requirements or code of conduct requirements, because it was an appointment, he wasn't a designated public office holder, it allowed him to dictate public policy to Trudeau and Freeland at the time. So he had 5 years to put the pieces in place that I view as aligning public policy with Brookfield's strategy, right? And what I mean by that, if you look at some of the policy initiatives, the green initiatives that were put in place under Trudeau, many of those initiatives align with Brookfield's strategy, either through the Global Transition Fund 1, which I'll get to in a second as it relates to Carney, but the concept and the principle of heat pumps, right? Mm-hmm. So remember when the announcement came out about Eastern Canada and they were going to supply heat pumps? Well, the largest owner of heat pumps in the country is Brookfield Asset Management. The issue of nuclear, right? One of the largest investors in the country is Brookfield Asset Management. And there are others. And for the sake of time, I mean, the public policy aligning with Brookfield's strategy is something that was created within those 5 years. The challenge with Trudeau is that, we were high up in the polls and they were going to lose it all. And when I say they, I mean the well-connected business insiders, the well-connected insiders, the lobbyists, as I refer to them as the incestuous liberal cabal. We're going to lose everything if Conservatives won that election. And so, they instilled Carney with the hope, almost a Hail Mary, like in football, right, where you throw the ball and, hoping to catch it in the end zone. Well, they caught it in the end zone, and Carney became the Prime Minister. I think the most telling thing, and again, all open source related to the committee, when the COO of Brookfield came before the committee and he was asked about the Global Transition Fund 1, which Mark Carney has still within his blind trust.
And he built.
He was asked, the COO, how much will he make as a result of that fund? And the COO referred to it as millions of dollars when it matures in 2032. It can actually mature a little bit later as well. And so, that really, for us at Ethics, when we heard that, it really sort of opened up a Pandora's box for us to consider, okay, well, if he stands to make millions and millions of dollars as a result of this Global Transition Fund 1, then, this alignment of public policy with Brookfield's strategy stands to reason in all aspects of the business model, artificial intelligence included. Of course, last week they just announced their artificial intelligence strategy. if he stands to make millions and millions of dollars as a result of this, certainly he wasn't going to allow that to be lost.
So one of the most important aspects of accountability when it comes to any democracy is the freedom of the press and journalists actually digging into what a government is doing, because the whole aspect of that principle is that the press is supposed to uncover what the government is doing to inform the public so they can make an educated decision as to whether or not they still support a government. Is that still happening in this country?
In certain places it is. Certainly on what you and Tanya are doing and what others in the independent media are doing. Look, I've said publicly in the House, and you may recall what I said, because I meant it. I said to the media, especially after the transactional majority, because when that power has been taken away from parliamentarians, both in the House of Commons and at committees, then the onus and the responsibility and the burden becomes on the media to do their goddamn jobs, is what I said, right? And what I meant by that at the time is, I gave the example that Canada is the only Western democracy in the world where the opposition party is held to a greater account than the governing party. You don't see that anywhere in the world. And they have to start holding this government to account, especially if MPs are unable to, because they're hiding, the Liberals that is, in camera, not allowing information to be released or whatever. It's going to be up to the press to do that. The problem is that, when you subsidize the media to the extent that it has been, obviously we know the numbers with CBC, and we know, $900 million in ancillary subsidized media. The challenge becomes when your mortgage and your meal depends on government handouts and government subsidies, you're never going to bite the hand that feeds you, right? And we've seen a lot of that happening. And it's been amazing to me. I mean, I've been here 11 years now, and I've seen the progression of this happening, providing tremendous cover to the media. I said at the time when the Liberals announced the media fund, early on in the first mandate of Justin Trudeau, I said at the time that this is going to cause this to happen. And I've seen it just rise to a level where it's actually gross, look, as conservatives in opposition, you don't mind being challenged on things, especially, in relation to issues that we're bringing up. But when, there's this dogged challenge of conservatives, and yet the Liberals get off scot-free when, scandals are brewing and other things. I look recently at, the Prime Minister's food bill when he was flying, $190,000. What they paid for orange juice. Bev Oda lost her job for $16 orange juice, and yet, the media just sort of fluff it off like it's nothing, right? When again, Carney's doing great. The well-connected insiders and incestuous liberal cabal are doing fantastic. But in the meantime, the people they're governing over are suffering greatly, and yet we don't hear anything about it. It's just, it's that level of accountability and responsibility that I'd like to see back from the mainstream media, and not have, the only Western democracy, not let us be the only Western democracy in the world where the opposition party is held to a greater account. It's gross, actually, Ryan, to be frank about it.
And Canadians are also asking this question repeatedly: where's the accountability? Where's the accountability? And there was a time in Parliament where parliamentarians and politicians, they were expected to be honorable. And if they did something and they did something egregious, they would step down and fall on their sword and, at least preserve their honor. And unfortunately, I think we've seen that has long passed with the Liberal Party. So when it comes to, that glorious day when we do get a conservative government, do we need new and revised ethics laws?
Well, we had that in our last platform.
Right, under Michael
policy
Barrett.
platform. Michael Barrett proposed that, and I stand by it 100%. Anything that we can do that can restore confidence in not just the work that MPs do, the ethical aspects of the job, but also, to provide better accountability, I'm all for. People might get upset, and look, we have a constitutional obligation as an opposition. Okay, our job is to hold the government to account. So that means, in many cases, prosecuting and litigating some of the scandals, the spending scandals, the well-connected insiders who are benefiting at great cost over the people that are being governed over. Um, I don't accept the premise that we should be an audience and not an opposition to the government. That's just not our job, right? And so people get upset because we are so determined to hold the government to account, especially in the absence of any media that's holding them into account. And I really appreciate, and I've given shout outs before to independent media like yourself and Tanya and others who are telling the truth, right? The one thing that is kryptonite to the liberals is truth. And when we stand up in front of a microphone, and they can't stop us from doing that, by the way, they can stop us at committees, they can stop us in the House, but they can't stop us from doing this. When we stand up and we tell the truth, the liberals hate it because it causes them to, even though they're not, it causes them to more so justify than be accountable for their actions. The people they're governing, and I've said this a couple of times, the people that they're governing over are suffering greatly. And it's a great cost. And what concerns me as a father, and I have 4 kids, I don't have a grandkids yet, but if I did have grandkids, I'd be concerned about the scattered pieces that they're going to be left to pick up as a result of what's gone on over the last 11 years. And it's not getting any better under Carney. And so, if you're a mom and dad or you're a grandparent, yeah, maybe things are going well for you. But think of the direction that this country is heading. And think of, the cause and effect of everything, every policy that the liberals have been implementing. And, they stand up in the House and why don't they support us? Well, because everything's failing. Why would I support failure? Doesn't make any sense. And so my concern is for future generations, my kids included, who are going to be left picking up the scattered pieces of what's left of this country after the liberals are done with it. I'm not going to sit there as an audience to this government. I'm going to sit there and do my constitutional obligation, as Pierre is, as every member of our caucus is doing, and that is to prosecute and litigate and hold this government to account to make sure that they don't continue to make the failed mistakes in policy and other areas that they've done over these last 11 years. And it's not getting better under Carney.